Okay, I'm based in social policy at the University of Edinburgh here. Some of the other speakers have talked about interdisciplinarity, and I'm quite interdisciplinary too, so I'm kind of doing socio-legal stuff and social policy stuff and historical stuff, so I move around lots of different disciplines. The title of this paper comes from the rubber stamp on the front of a file of correspondence that I found in the National Archives in London from 1943. And it didn't come from a file about 1943, it wasn't about the war, it wasn't about spying, it wasn't about anything that we might imagine would be needed to be confidential or secret. It was about proposed arrangements for checking up on claimants of sickness benefits to check whether they were really sick or not. And so I chose this title because I wanted it to convey something of what it's like to do archive research, and that's mainly what I'm going to talk about today. Actually, I realise I think all of us have failed to do what we were asked to do, but I am not going to say very much about analysis, but more about the actual mechanisms of doing archive research and what that's like, and how it differs from the kind of research that you might use using documents that are available online or which are published. So just a little bit about archives. I know other people are going to talk about archives too, but I'm going to talk about what I think an archive is. You may think of it as being sort of dusty old books or things with you need to wear gloves to handle, or here's an image from the film Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Benedict Cumberbatch wandering around the files of MI5, that kind of thing. So when we think of archives, what is it we think of? Do we think of these kinds of things? On the other hand, you may think that you can get everything on the internet these days. We can, of course, get an awful lot of stuff from the internet, particularly, because I'm talking from a policy perspective, particularly in the field of social policy, particularly if you're looking at relatively recent events, you probably can get most of the documents that you might want to look at on the internet, digitally produced, or if not, certainly published. So my question really is, why bother with archives? They do look a bit like that shot from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Can't promise that you'll find Benedict Cumberbatch in them, but they are these kind of very ordered files and kept very carefully by archivists in dark basements. What they contain, well, again, there's different definitions of archives, but the kinds of things that I'm looking at are archives that hold unique documents, so things which have not been published. There aren't copies in every library, there's only one copy. And the ones that I'm looking at, which are government archives, are held in the National Archives in London, most of which have not been digitised. It's one of the questions people always say to me, oh, well, surely you can get that stuff online these days. But only 5% of what's in the National Archives in London is actually available online. The rest of it, they just have not had the time or the money or the interest to digitise it. They've got a rolling programme of digitising stuff, but my stuff is a bit obscure. That's a link to the National Archives. I won't show you it, but you can get they've got little videos about how they produce archives and what they do with them. So to illustrate the use of archives, I just want to tell you a little bit about the project that I'm doing at the moment, which is a Leverhulme project looking at the sickness benefit scheme in the United Kingdom from 1911 to the present day. I've got a historical problem like Chloe did. It's not quite as long, but I am looking at 100 years, which is still a bit difficult. But it's set very much in the context of today's welfare reform, where there's a lot of debate at the moment about how we should go about assessing who is eligible for a sickness benefit or employment support allowance, as it's called today. And I'm interested in how those kinds of questions were asked in 1911 when that scheme was first set up, but also how it changed over the course of the 20th century. And I'm doing the same as Chloe said she'd done, kind of looking in at different important stages of change. When it was first introduced in 1911, the things that happened after the Second World War, when we had the kind of, if you like, the modern welfare state, some important issues to do with gender and how that changed as a result of sex discrimination legislation in the 1970s, and how that led up to the present day. So that's what my project's about, and I want to look at how I'm using archives to do it. Now, the first thing really is a question that I had. I first started looking at the sickness benefit scheme from 1911, and I discovered through looking at reports and legislation at the time that when people claimed a benefit, they had a right to appeal against a refusal of that benefit. So they claimed sickness benefit, the decision maker says you're not entitled because you're not sick enough, basically. They had a right of appeal. Now, I was interested in appeals because I've done work on appeals in the modern social security system. So I just wondered, you know, did anybody use it? Were there any appeals? Were there any records of those appeals? What happened? What could the appeals tell us about the decision-making process? That was my kind of question. So then I had to think, how on earth am I going to find anything that will answer that question? And the first thing I found, and I have to say, I can't remember now how I found it. I think it was an accident. I was looking for something else. But I was looking in parliamentary papers online. Some of you may be aware of this source. If you're not, it's great. What this has is digitised versions of parliamentary papers going back to about, I don't know, 1600 or something, but certainly has a lot of stuff from the 20th century. And in that, I found digitised copies of 140 appeal cases against refusals of sickness benefit in the period 1914 to 19. So that was my first source. They looked a little bit like this. Well, that's the front cover. And in fact, that's the thing that got me started on my project and the thing which actually got me the funding, because I did some work on this digitised stuff while I was working in a previous job and published some work from it and persuaded the Leverhulme Trust that it was worth giving me money to do some more. At the point that I got the funding from the Leverhulme Trust, I didn't know if there was any more stuff available. All I knew was about these 140 cases, so I was taking a big risk, as were they, I have to say. That was fine, that was great. The next thing I found, again just by looking, was I found some more published cases in the National Library of Scotland, another 40 cases. And again, I don't know how familiar you all are with using these different institutions. National Library of Scotland, you can go in, you can read stuff, but you can't take it away, and you can't photograph it. I think you can photocopy stuff with a lot of complicated permissions. But I found another 40 cases, took me up to 1923. I also found another 300 Irish cases, which are in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. I haven't actually looked at them yet, mainly because, partly because I haven't had time to go to Oxford, and mainly because Ireland is a very unusual case. And again, for those of you who know the sort of history of the British Isles, Ireland became independent after this, and so it's a question as to whether those cases are important for my study or not, but I know they exist and I might yet look at them. So the next thing I had to do was to see if there was anything in the National Archives in London, and people said to me, that's where it will be. National Archives will hold any information, and what I hoped they might have as well was perhaps some of the background papers relating to these appeal cases. So I went to National Archives in Kew. The catalogue is very difficult to find anything in. Cataloguers think in a particular way about archives, and it will almost certainly not be the same way as you think. But I did find in National Archives what I regarded as my goldmine, which is another 150 cases from between 1927 and 1929. Now, I don't know, and they don't know, because I've asked them why they have those 150 cases or why they don't have any other cases. I think the reason is that archivists, when they're deciding what to keep, tend to take samples of things. And so probably what they did when the Ministry of Health, as it would have been, was getting rid of its archives, and it went to the National Archives, and they probably had several thousand of these things, and they thought, well, we can't keep them all, we'll take a sample from this particular year. That's the best I can come up with. But for my purposes, it gave me another 150 cases from a slightly different period from the earlier ones. The wonderful thing about these cases is that they're not anonymised. Now, that's very important for me. I've anonymised this one for ethical reasons, so you don't have the name of the claimant. But these ones, the actual version of the report, which is there, look very, very similar to the published cases. But the additional information I get is the name of, and this is a technical thing which I won't go into detail about, but the name of the respondents in the appeal cases, because they weren't actually government departments, they were what we would call today third sector organisations. It gave me the names, if people were represented by lawyers or representatives in any kind, it tells me who they were. It also gives me the name of the decision maker in the legal case, which But it doesn't give me their names. What it gives me is their signatures, which is quite interesting because sometimes I can't even read the signatures, but I have actually now managed to work out from those 150 cases who the different judges were, and it's given me some interesting information about their different style of writing, which I would never have, I can't get from the published anonymous ones. So that's something that archives add that I can't get from published sources. What else do they have? The other thing they have is thousands of minutes of meetings, memos, civil service documents, basically, where civil servants in the Ministry of Health are discussing how to progress a particular policy in relation to sickness benefits, dating right back from 1911 until the present day. I have to do some sampling, is probably too fancy a word for it, but I have to make some decisions about which one to look at. Mainly what I'm looking at is key periods of change and particular themes which are relevant to my research, which I don't need to go into the detail of right here. These files look like this. I don't have the one with the confidential stamp on it, and this is to do with processes of photographing. I only photograph stuff in the files because I want to refer to it. I wasn't actually thinking when I was doing it that I might want to use it in a presentation, so I didn't photograph that one. But they look a bit like this. This is one from 1949, I think, and it's yeah, it's a bureaucratic file. That's what it looks like. What it contains is a whole lot of, again, memos and stuff between civil servants about how to deal with women who were able to do their own housework, and whether that was a relevant question in relation to whether they were able to work in terms of the benefits system, which is very important. One of the things in it is a handwritten memo, which I love. This is what it says. This is actually one of the civil servants commenting on one of these legal decisions and saying this is extraordinary, we need to do something about it. So that's a very nice thing that I found. It also happens to include a random extra appeal case that wasn't in the other files. Here's another one from 1948. This is again about sick visiting, spying, if you like, on people that were claiming benefits. So here they're saying, this is in 1948, just after the sort of post-war welfare state was set up, time to do something about this, time to increase the sick visiting. The other thing they have is, and again I'm looking at later periods now, is some of the case papers for some later legal decisions, and I just want to mention this one to you. This is a legal decision from 1948, and on the left here is what the published thing says. It's very formalised, it's very legalistic. It sort of says, you know, this person was found to be capable of work, but at the material time he was employed as a part-time light work as a brush maker, and because he was working he wasn't entitled to benefit. But in the background file which I found in the archives is this letter from the claimant's GP, which, just to summarise very briefly, says this boy, he's only about 17, is terminally ill, he doesn't know he's terminally ill, I'm trying to keep him going. And so I've managed to find this job for him where this factory is willing to take him on and do a bit of work which he really can't do. But it's not about regulations, it's about a boy's health. Now this thing is the kind of thing which makes me think that's where an archive really makes a difference. Because it doesn't make any change at all to the legal basis of the Commissioner's decision. That's still the same as it was. But for me it brings home the real people that we find in these archives and the real stories about their lives. Just very briefly in terms of my work, what's online, what's not. A lot of stuff's available online. I probably could do my entire project based on that. I've got those appeal cases up to 1923. I've got loads of annual reports, special investigations. I've got higher level legal cases which I can get through Westlaw database, and after sort of later in the 20th century, more and more stuff is available online. But in the archives, I've got those early appeal cases, I've got all those civil service files, and I've got those background files for the legal cases. So they kind of add something. What do they add? For me, they add stuff in terms of quantity. I get an extra 150 cases that I didn't otherwise have, so doubling my data set, if you like. They give me names and details that are missing from anonymised files, which allow me to kind of make connections across cases that I couldn't otherwise do. The civil service memos give me a lot of contextual information about what the civil servants were thinking about, how the policy problem was framed, which is where the social policy comes in. You know, what was the problem that they were trying to solve? The real life details, and what in an article by somebody called Robinson says is about the physicality of it. The fact that they're written on very flimsy paper, these things are, they never write on one piece of paper once. You get a memo, and then you get a reply, and then another reply, and another reply, and then you turn it over, and there's another series of stuff. Something about that period of the mid-20th century and how bureaucrats operated. They're very formal. They're the kinds of things that today we would send in emails, but they're, you know, dear Mr. So-and-so, and yours sincerely, but they're probably in an office down the road. Sometimes they put in little jokes to each other, not very often, but just occasionally, and those examples of handwriting, which again kind of make it feel more real. It doesn't make the data any more, for me, valid or factual, but somehow it brings things home. And I think what it does for me is it's almost like, Robinson talks about it being almost like a rite of passage for historians, the moment of sitting in the archive with the real papers. And as social scientists, I think we've all got rites of passage like that. You know, the first face-to-face interviews we do, the first focus groups, the first questionnaire that we produce for the anthropologists, the first ethnographic study. It's that rite of passage. This is real. And it does feel a bit like that to me. I mean, I don't think it makes me into a historian. In fact, I'm certain it doesn't. But it kind of makes me think I can hold my head up amongst historians because I've been there and I've felt that paper. What's missing? Lots of stuff just isn't there. Some of it's been catalogued in such a way that I can't find it. There's so much I can't possibly look at it. Again, I think like a lot of social research, I always have the sense that if I just went back one more time, I would find some crucial thing. From a pure practical point of view, compared to stuff that you can get on the internet, the physical business of getting it from the paper file into my head and onto my computer is more cumbersome. I have to, well, I won't talk about that just now, maybe talk about it in questions, but you know, do you take notes, do you take photographs, how do you deal with that? So it doesn't answer everything. Key point, I think to remember though, is what is your research question? What is it you want to find out? How is this going to help you? And as Hill says, you know, what you find determines what you analyse, but also what you're looking for structures what you find. I mean, I think you have to remember that you're never going to find the answer. So that's really just my description of what it feels like to use archive materials. I've got a couple of pages of references which I can make available. That's some written references, and there's also some useful websites which you might find useful.
Okay, maybe not lots of time, but one or two questions I think we can have for Jackie. Are there any? Yeah?
Just a purely practical perspective.
Yeah.
How do you organize? You have all of these cases, all of these instances. How do you organize them, collate them?
Yeah, this is a bit. Well, what I've done with them, it's about 300 in total. In terms of the cases, I'm still working out a bit what to do with all the other stuff. Is I use the NVivo software, and I basically create a file for every case, and then that allows me to analyse it in all sorts of different ways. What I failed to do, and maybe other experienced users can work out how to do this for me, is to find any way of actually uploading the documents into NVivo. So what I have instead is notes on every case, which I then analyse my notes, which creates problems, because when I haven't noted something, it's not there. So, but that's practically what I do, yeah. And then I look for themes and patterns and etc.
Yeah?
Were the archives, did it allow you to see the whole case? And what was the balance between those that were accepted successful appeals and those that were rejected?
Yeah, in terms of the pre-war cases, no, I don't have the whole case. All I've got is the decision. So in fact, in terms of the formal information, it's actually exactly the same as the published cases, except the only difference is they're not anonymised. So there's lots of stuff missing. And why were they successful? Why were they not? Lots of reasons, hard to tell. What I've got for the post-war ones, and they're much harder to find actually, because they don't. Legal cases are labelled in particular kinds of ways, and the things in the archives don't connect with the legal labels, and so it's really hard to find them. So that case that I showed you about the boy with the terminal illness, it was not entirely accident, but not exactly easy for me to find that. But that has all the papers. So that has the letters from the claimant and the letters from the doctor, and in his case a letter from his parents, and so that gives you kind of more sort of what was really going on. But I don't have those at all for the earlier ones, but I don't think they exist. I think they've gone.
Right, thanks. Let's thank Jackie again. Right. Thanks, Jackie. So moving on.